Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab, sponsored by CPA Practice Advisor, with your hosts, Randy Johnston and Brian Tankersley.
Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab. I'm Randy Johnston with my co-host, Brian Tankersley. We have been getting so doggone many questions. I thought it was time to talk about a little end-user technology with you. Now, if you follow us on a regular basis, early in 2025, we did our traditional CES sessions. And in that CES session, we had explained how Dell had renamed their product lines following the Apple approaches. In other words, doing the base, plus, and premium along with their no-name Pro and Max lines along with sizes. So when you start looking at a product like the Dell XPS, that's now actually called a Dell Premium 12, let's say. And so if you want to do something like the Latitude line, it's the Dell Pro, but it's also available as Pro Plus and Pro Premium and 12, 13, 14, 15, 17. It's a mess, okay? And I'm sure as Dell gets this straightened out, it'll all get better. But I had a practitioner call me this week and said, look, I'm a Dell buyer and I need to buy some new equipment, but I don't know what to buy. I can't find anything that follows your recommendations on the Dell website. Now, Brian and I, through the last 10 years or so, have come up with a standard set of recommendations year by year by year. And we usually have a PC buyer and a Mac buyer set of configurations. Now, Brian just refreshed his desktop, trying to get ahead of the, any potential tariffs that might occur. And we figure there's going to still be some supply chain shortages with some disruption here. But the bottom line here is that the PC and Mac buyer profiles continue to need attention. You just can't buy any old computer. So the core recommendation we started making in 2024 and continue here in 2025 is that if you're an Intel buyer, you're looking for Core Ultras. And if you're an AMD buyer, 7 of the 9 chipsets that they make have the AI processors in them. And if you're a Mac buyer, then you want to be up in the M4 family and you're really looking for a lot of the Max technology there. Now, that's a long setup, Brian, from my side, but I'd like to have your feedback on this. But one thing that some technical people are trying to claim incorrectly is that if you're in the cloud, you don't need any of this local processing capability. And that is just so incorrect. You don't need the local processing capability as long as you don't run Excel or you don't use any AI, or if you don't, and I can kind of keep going, and it doesn't take very long before you're like, wow. But all phones, and we'll talk more about phones in a minute, have neural processing units. And that's actually what the Core Ultra has in it, is a neural processing unit for AI. All right, too much setup. But Brian, what I'm trying to get to is if somebody called you today and said, what should I buy? What would it be? Because I've answered that question at least a dozen times this week.
Well, I will tell you that I agree with the recommendations we have up here. I will tell you that one of the things that I did this time that I haven't done in probably 20 years is build my own machine. So, and again, you don't need to do this. Okay, you should buy something with 3 years of on-site support that's from one of the big manufacturers, so that your stuff doesn't go crazy. But I'm doing a lot of reviews. I'm doing a lot of video, and I need heavy-duty video rendering at a level that I just can't get that kind of graphics processing unit for a reasonable amount of money. So I spent about $2,000, which includes a $500 video card, a $500 processor, and a bunch of other things. I was pleasantly surprised. My GPU is one of the top 10 GPUs at the time I bought it. It's a card that takes up 3 slots in my huge case that I bought for it. I've got 64 gigs of RAM on it. I bought a Ryzen 9 7950X, which is a rocket ship. I think 20 cores or something insane on that. A 2 terabyte solid state drive, and then I'm running five external monitors on it. Okay, so it's a I built the machine that I've always wanted. And the thing I would say here is that even for your junior staff people, you're paying your junior staff people 40, $50,000 a year at least. Um, why are you going to why are you going to try to save $300 buying just good enough machine for right now instead of buying them the machine that they want? Because they're going to be joined at the hip with it, and they need to have the right specs so that they get the performance they need and so that they feel valued. When you give somebody a cheap machine, they don't feel valued. It says to them, I love you so much that I'm willing to cut corners on what you use every day.
hmm And so some of the cutting of corners that I've continued to see in firms, and I had the good pleasure of being in many different firms in 2024 and already in some firms in 2025. Monitors are also a big deal. But before we switch to monitors, the monitor sends an awful lot of the message, but we have an end of life problem imminent also, because on October 14th of 2025, Windows 10 will be discontinued, and Microsoft has officially published the prices if you want to maintain Windows 10 security at $61 per year, and they will do that for up to 3 years. Well, the statistics still show that Windows 10 is a dominant operating system, but Windows 11 is coming along. But the core here is that if you're a PC buyer, you need to be running Windows 11 and positioning for the next Windows. And to do that, you have to be on the right chips. So the processor is still critical. You can only buy products that say Intel Core Ultra, or you have to look at the AMD, and I would pick sevens and nines in most CPA firms for performance, but you want the ones that have the neural processing units, and the
And,
AMDs are not as evident.
and I cannot agree with you enough on that, Randy, about this. People, Core i3 and i5 are dead to you. i3s, i5s are dead to you. Okay. The Ryzen 3, Ryzen 5 are dead to you. They do not exist. Okay. You are putting a Chevy Vega or a Ford Pinto in the hands of your staff, and you will live to regret it and get to pay recruiting fees on the replacements if you do that. Okay. So, I mean, just the law of large numbers will catch up with you. Okay. So get them the right tools and the right gear that says that I respect you. I respect your time with your family. And I want you to have something that meets your needs and exceeds them all the time.
Yeah. So that gets us to the GPUs. Now, you heard Brian say he spent $500 on a GPU because he's doing a lot of video rendering. And I spent $2,000 on a GPU for my machine because
Now,
of the
now you,
same
you bought
reason.
that, you bought that in the middle of COVID though.
Nope, 2 years ago.
2 years ago. Okay. Well, then I'm
Yeah.
just cheap, folks. I only spent
And
500.
well, no, the difference is those darn GPUs have been falling in price like a rock. Okay.
Mhm.
But the main point that I want to make here is both of us chose to buy dedicated GPUs. And starting in 2016, I had recommended that you always spent the extra money for a dedicated GPU. But I want you to know here in 2025, for most of you, you can stop buying the dedicated GPUs and you can revert back to buying the integrated GPUs. And the question might be, well, why, Randy? Your material still says dedicated GPU. We are in a position and in a time frame where the integrated GPUs will be as fast as my $2,000 GPU. So I feel pretty good if you buy an integrated GPU that's just as quick as the one that I'm using, but you don't have to pay more for
Now,
it. That's a
now,
good deal.
I will say that if you're going to get an integrated GPU, you need to juice the RAM. Okay. So if you're gonna get that integrated GPU, just for perspective here, okay, my graphics card that I have has 64 gigs of DDR5 RAM on it. Okay, or 32 gigs. Okay, and I have 64 gigs for processing. I mention this to you here because I want you to understand that I have basically 96 gigs of RAM on that system. Okay. So 64 in my mind is going to be where you want to be if you're going to use that integrated GPU as a minimum. And that's a lot of RAM. Okay. But again, I nobody runs 10 applications at once like we do on 5 different monitors. Okay. Nobody else does this. Okay. So I want you to have the hardware to handle this. The problem you and I have is three or fourfold. Okay. One of them is that we run 10 applications at once. They are pre-Y2K code that doesn't run well on modern processors because it's poorly written and requires too many database calls and so forth. And so as a result, even though we're not going to Mars and calculating how to do a 3D rendering of a starship thing and catch a rocket when it comes back to Brownsville or whatever, even though we're not doing that, we still need similar processing capabilities because we're making all of these 1990s technologies work together in 2025 a way they shouldn't have to.
Yeah, so an easy way to say that, many of you are running a tax software, an audit software, an accounting software. You're running the operating system of Windows. You're running Excel. You're running uh, email, probably Outlook. And notice I'm already at six without even thinking about it very hard. Oh,
And
and then
you've not said a browser, you've not said research, you've not said QuickBooks, you've
uh,
not said
the Adobe Pig.
PDF. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you've got good Lord, you've got if you're running less than 10 things, you're not working very hard.
So notice that what happens here then when we start talking about RAM, one of the things you might be prone to do, or your IT providers might try to get you to do, Brian's already ranted on this, no threes and fives, but they might try to get you to buy a five instead of a seven or a nine. But also they might try to get you to get by on 16 gig RAM, or maybe 32 gig of RAM. And we're saying it's time to be doing 64 gig of RAM. And what we know is with the major brands, the Lenovo's, the Dell's, the HP, it's actually a little hard to get a machine that has the 64 gig of RAM in it. And so clearly, the next thing that we're after here is that you need to make sure you got enough bloody RAM.
And I'm showing you my task manager here on my machine that has 632 gigs of RAM on the video card that's not shown here, but then 64 gigs on the motherboard. And we're sitting here doing things, and I have, because of add-ins and so forth, I'm using 42% of the memory right now. Okay. So if I had 32 gigs of RAM, I'd be maxed out right now. And I'm not really working very hard. Okay. So I want you to get that this need to do this is very real if you want things to run smoothly.
So then the next couple of key points for your new generation hardware purchases, make sure you're still buying PCIe Gen 4 solid state drives. We still find people wanting to cut a corner and buy a spinning drive, which makes almost zero sense to me. And the days of Thunderbolt 5 are rolling in now. So we see less and less USB A's and a lot more USB C's that are coming of age. So there's quite a number of these types of attributes that are in play. Now, for the Mac buyers, pretty much the rules are all the same. One thing that the Mac buyers have had for some time is DDR5 unified memory, and we're just seeing that unified memory arrive over in the Intel world on the Core Ultras. But fundamentally, you can begin to feel that the ProRes graphics that have been in the Macs for so long, that's also coming of age, that we probably won't be recommending that in the not too distant future. But the hardware specs for the two platforms are relatively the same at this point. So,
And I'm experimenting with Zorin OS. That's a Linux distribution. It's not quite ready for prime time, but I don't know for those of you that use a hosting service that it might not show up on a recommendation in a couple of years. It's actually pretty slick.
Pretty slick. Well, then we'll go back to the monitors because again, the buyers this week have been asking me about laptops and desktops, but they've also been asking about monitors. And we have recommended curved monitors for some years, the LGs and the HPs and others that have the curved units. I actually answered the question for a practitioner out of Florida this morning who, was looking for a 32-inch monitor and said, do you recommend flat or curved? And that's one of those it depends questions. If you've got a single 32-inch, okay, being flat is fine. If you're going to run multiple monitors, maybe more. So I pointed that particular buyer to LG monitors because the LG monitors were running between $188 and $399 on 32s, but the 34-inch curved was only about $220. So time out. You can hear that the bigger monitors are still going to be a lot more money. The smaller monitors less, but 2 and 3 monitors would be kind of minimum to play. And you can hear Brian is playing with 5. Now, we are again watching firms that have bought monitors in the past that bought 22s, 24s, 27s. They're trying to get by with those smaller monitors. And I think they are affecting people's productivity, as it turns out. Well, Brian, any other comments in terms of, I guess there'd be another big one because we've talked about mice and keyboards in the past, but what about anything else on the computers themselves?
Well, I think the days of Thunderbolt 5 are here. I think that was a Tom Cruise movie back in the 80s about NASCAR, Days of Thunder. So that's that's a good thing. The other thing is that Microsoft has stopped making keyboards and mice, and so a lot of you that liked those, like the split keyboards that again Microsoft used to make that were ergonomically well formed. Matthias has actually started to make those out of Canada. I actually have one of those that's actually in the box. I've that came in yesterday that I'm going to take. I'm going to get everything going. Um, I don't know why things would be messed up here after January the 20th. Now that we're on February the 7th as we record this, but again, it's we'll figure it all out.
Well,
But
but the bottom line here is these split keyboards. Steve McGowan and I talked about these at some length, and the armrest, the wrist pad on these, very, very soft. And they're wireless adapted, either USB-A or USB-C, and sub $100 keyboard. So I'm looking at this saying, I think this is a highly likely valuable thing for you to consider. So getting the right mouse, getting the right keyboard.
this is my Matthias mouse. I have beat the living crud out of it. It is a wired PBT mouse, and it is the best mouse I have ever owned, and it's a Matthias product. So I just mentioned that to you here because we talk about things that we use, where we spend our own good green money, and I got to tell you that I'd buy this thing again in a heartbeat.
Yeah, so Brian fixes me once in a while when I say things like A6, and I'm going to fix him here on PBT, polybutylene terephthalate. It's a special type of plastic that doesn't get ooky over time. It maintains its finish, and it's really pretty stunning how good it is. We find that the other mice that are made from most of the bigs, actually over time you can kind of see your skin oils and other things as they deteriorate. Well, one other big thing that's happened, and another motivation as we were thinking about things that we need to talk about, was phones have come out with their new models. And of course the iPhone, new generation, the iPhone 16, a lot of people are buying those because of the Apple Intelligence. Brian got his in Dallas when we were together. And, the AI was turned off by default, but it's now turned on by default in the 18.3 version of the operating system and later. We are hearing some performance issues with the AI turned on. Don't know the root cause of that at this point, but just want you to be aware that at this point, there's only a few models of the iPhone that are supporting the AI fully. Older models, not so much. One thing that might be a little bit of a twist for traditional iPhone buyers is the Lightning plug has gone away. It's now USB-C, and that's for Euro compliance, the European Union. But also the neural processors we were talking about for the desktops and laptops, guess what? The iPhone 16s have more neural engine cores in them. So, Brian, what's your experience been like going from your old iPhone to your iPhone 16?
It's a rocket ship. I don't have to wait on it anymore. And I run 20 apps at once on my phone. I mean, I am in and out of my phone all the time, and I run a two location tracking applications, and all kinds of things in the background, and it keeps up with me and goes fast all the time, and that's all I can ask for. Very pleased with how it's worked out. I actually have a iPhone 16 Pro Max. I did not go up to the 1 terabyte storage. I did the 512 gig storage on it. The pictures are much better with the 48 megapixel ultra wide. Even the selfies at 12 megapixels. I thought that some of us were not designed to be seen in fabulous HD, and they actually have some AI photo enhancements so that the pictures of me seem to look a little better than maybe I think they should, because they're probably being AI enhanced. So it's helped me to have some more fabulous posts. I'm not headed for influencer status, but it's works out well. And again, I got to tell you, I really had to swallow, because it was about $1,700 by the time I paid tax and got the Apple Care for 2 years and all of the other things on the mid-grade iPhone 16 Pro Max. But my previous one was a 12 Pro Max, so I'd had it long enough, and it is now my son's trusty phone. And if he drops it and destroys it, it is fully depreciated at this point. So anyway.
Well, as we think about these phones and as we record this particular lab for you, there's rumors that Apple intends to put out an entry-level phone. But as you just heard, Brian's iPhone purchase is almost as expensive as a typical laptop purchase. In fact, that's a pretty good rule of thumb right now. For some configurations, the phones are more expensive than your computer, but we believe that you want to be at least on the Pro or Pro Max in the iPhone line. Well, people have been also asking about the Google app phones that are out there. And the Pixel 9 came out last August, and it has performed beautifully for all places that we've had this purchased. Again, a better neural processor in it. The Google Tensor G4 is doing wonderful work on security and AI. And we suspect there will be a Pixel 10 using a Tensor G5 in 2025. But the price range of most of these smartphones is competitive. There's no real big price advantage one line versus another as we see it. It's really going to be by product size and line.
Now catch that this one and the iPhone both have the ability to communicate with non-terrestrial networks, or NTNs. Okay. And I think that's important, because sometimes we go places where, like, we were out in the middle of serious nowhere in Texas when we were at that Zoho thing. I have bees in the middle of serious nowhere in East Tennessee, a serious banjo country where you hear dueling banjos every time you turn a corner. Uh, and I just mention it to you here because this ability to, when you're hiking or doing, skiing or doing something outdoors in a rural area, these non-terrestrial networks are kind of a game changer. It makes it possible so that you can get help even in an emergency, and you can send a pin over these things so that people can find you. And that's another cool thing that they've added.
Yeah, and I think T-Mobile is the leader in that area right now, but I do believe
Mhm.
that all the carriers will get there. Now, of course, Samsung last summer introduced their Z Fold 6 and Z Flip 6, both fine products. I've had them, I've recommended to a number of people, and everybody that's bought those has been happy with their choices. But also a relatively new release is the Samsung S25. Now, this we've been watching for because it is running on the Snapdragon 8 Elite, which is the same processor chip that is used in the Microsoft Copilot PC. So think we've got computer power in a phone. And all the reviews on the S25 seem very positive. The one that I actually read before we recorded today said that, he had set up his phone to be use it as a computer, and he was glad that he did because he probably won't go back to a computer. And I thought that was an interesting statement for at least that one reviewer. But it is Snapdragon 8 Elite running on Android 15. So if you're thinking about phones, you've got a window here of certainly the first half of 2025. All new generation products are out, and you won't see new generation products again, I do not believe, until much later in the year. So we'd been answering those questions for so many people. Like I said, I'd received about a dozen requests this week alone. I bet you I've had 50 requests so far in 2025. Tell me what to buy for a computer, what to get for a phone. And I thought just a chit chat between Brian and I might help you. So, Brian, any parting thoughts on this end user equipment?
Well, I agree with you that you're going to spend about the same for a computer as you will for a phone. I also agree, again, as you're looking at buying a new phone, remember that the cheap ones are still $1,000. And so, the thing I would say again is you might as well get what you want, because you're going to spend a lot of time staring at it and a lot of time frustrated if you don't get the right tools. Okay. I'm very happy with my rocket ship computer. I wish I'd done it years ago. And, I am happy with my purchase of the phone. Now, I had a little more capital expenditures in Q4 last year than I had hoped to, but I should be set up in pretty good shape here, and I'm about $4,000 in for a new computer and for a new phone, and I feel very good about the purchases I made.
Yeah. Well, when I think about some of the tablets and so forth, because I'd actually gotten in on the early part of the M4 iPad uh, generation, I was hoping that they would be powerful enough to really be a computer substitute. Not quite. Do I use it frequently? Yes. But I'd much rather take my computer at similar price points with touchscreen on it than I would over the iPad. But on the phone side, you really do have to choose an update.
Now, I talked about Zorin OS, the Linux distribution that I'm running on one of my older computers. I will tell you, it's technically more difficult to set up than Windows on that laptop, but I intentionally used it at the Acumatica conference pretty much for everything. And I can do, as long as I have an internet connection, I can do everything I need to in a web browser or on the local machine. And so I mentioned that to you here because I think that, Linux isn't quite ready for prime time yet as your primary desktop operating system, but there may be things that you do end up running in Linux in the future that, where you run them as containers or you run them as virtual machines so that you can get access to those things. And it's, once it's configured, there is some technical complexity to the configuration, but it's not brain surgery once it's configured and set up.
And
It's a
as
great way to get, there's a lot of great automation and batch processing tools you can do in Linux that really make Windows really sing, and you can really use it for those heavy duty things where you have to do a lot of rote processing.
And, as you were saying that, Brian, I'm just thinking, okay, we get good technicians that get these things, script them, they'll be configured. You don't really think about it. And, to me, that's still my core underpinning. When technology is working, you don't think about it. Well, we hope we can keep you from thinking about technology too much. And Brian and I appreciate you listening in on another Accounting Technology Lab. We'll see you again soon. Good day.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. We'll be back next Saturday with a new episode of the Technology Lab from CPA Practice Advisor. Have a great week.